Thanks to Andrew for that wonderful sermon. It is my pleasure to introduce to you Jared Beverly. Jared Beverly was born and raised in Lawton, Oklahoma, and was a member of the Church of Christ for most of his life, but has since moved to the United Church of Christ. He went to Oklahoma Christian University, where he received his bachelor's in teaching English as a foreign language. After taking a year off, he decided to go back to school and pursue a Master of Theological Studies at the finest theological school in the country, the Candler School of Theology at Emory University. He is passionate about dead languages and biblical studies and is interested in queer theology. He currently attends Kirkwood United Church of Christ in Atlanta, Georgia. Join me in welcoming Jared as he preaches his sermon entitled, God in Israel's Neighborhood, God in Our Neighborhood. Jared.
Alrighty, everybody hear me? Okay, I am not a preacher, so it was a surprise to me when one day as I was washing my hands in the bathroom, somebody came up to me and said, "Hey, do you want to go to a preaching conference?" Sure, why not? I guess that just goes to show you that whenever God calls you, you need to listen to God, even if it's in the bathroom. But now that I'm here, I'm thankful to be here, and I have something to say. I have a message to say about the Ten Commandments, so let's get into that. Before we get too far, you need to know a little bit about my background. As was said in the introduction, I was raised Church of Christ, and there's not a huge focus on the Ten Commandments in the Church of Christ. It's mainly focused on being a New Testament Christian. So anything in the Old Testament, those laws aren't binding anymore. So we were taught to follow the laws that Jesus and Paul said rather than what Moses said. So I didn't grow up with a huge respect for the Ten Commandments, but I can see that around me and the rest of the Christian world, that does exist. I mean, the Ten Commandments are a huge foundational document in our society. I don't think it's too far to say that most people think it's kind of the foundation of Western morality. I mean, if you say, why don't you murder people? I mean, yes, it's illegal, but it's in the Ten Commandments. That's why you don't murder people. So people have taken the Ten Commandments to be the moral law for everyone at all times, at all places. The moral law, the end-all, be-all of laws. And that's what I want to argue against today. So what my purpose today is to say, my main point is that the Ten Commandments are not at all for us today. They're not at all for us today, but at the same time they are for us because we can learn from them how God speaks to different people in different cultures. Not for us, but they are for us. Stay with me, we'll figure out what that means. We'll go through the Ten Commandments real quick here. I'm going to be going through Exodus 20. I'll be reading from the TNIV, and I'll use the Protestant Reformed tradition of the numbering of the Ten Commandments. Let's start with the preamble to the Ten Commandments. Exodus 20, verse 2, starts with God. I am the Lord. I am Yahweh, your God, who brought you out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. So we can already tell this is not for us. This is written to a really narrow audience. As far as I know, nobody in this room was a slave in Egypt. I know I wasn't. I don't know anybody who was. This is for ancient Israel. This is God talking to ancient Israel and speaking to that people. So this is already narrowing it down. Now let's look at the first commandment. You shall have no other gods before me. And the second commandment will go with this as well, the don't make idols commandment. You shall have no other gods before me. Now, I don't know about you, but it's never really been a huge temptation for me to go off and worship Baal. I realize that there are other gods that people worship, even today, but it's not been a huge issue for me. Now, if I'm ancient Israel, this is an issue, because if I'm going into the land of Canaan, I need to know how to live there. I need to know how to farm there. So if I plant my seed, I need to know who to pray to make sure that grows. And the god of the land of Canaan was Baal. So the Canaanites prayed to Baal to make sure stuff grows. But God says, no, you're not going to do that anymore. Baal is not your Lord. Yahweh is your Lord. So he's completely changing how society works in the land of Canaan. But we don't grow crops like that anymore. We don't have particular prayers to say to particular deities in order to make our crops grow. We have different mindsets with that, and that's okay. We're just different cultures. So I recognize that there are other gods that people can worship, but that's not really been a huge deal for me. I've always been a follower of Yahweh, always been a follower of Jesus as God. And so these two commandments are not really for me. Third commandment, you shall not misuse the name of the Lord, the name of Yahweh your God. It doesn't say don't misuse the word God. It doesn't say don't misuse the word Jesus. It says don't take in vain the name Yahweh. I don't know anybody who says Yahweh in everyday conversation. So I was talking to Yahweh last night. No, nobody says that. So we don't use the word Yahweh all that much. It's kind of a Jewish designation for God, and even the Jews don't even use it all that much. They prefer to say Adonai instead. And so you cannot misuse a name that you don't ever even use. It just doesn't work. This commandment doesn't work for us today because we don't ever use the word Yahweh. This is not for us. Fourth commandment, remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. Now, most Christians today don't really keep the Sabbath in the way this is talking about. The Seventh-day Adventists have their special day on Saturday. Most of the rest of us have moved it to Sunday. But even on Sundays, we don't take that as a special day where you make a concerted effort not to do any work. I mean, it may be a day off, except for preachers. Preachers don't get Sunday off. It may be a day off, but we don't make special efforts to avoid doing work. We may mow the lawn or watch TV or turn on a light bulb or something on a Sunday, and that's okay. We're not keeping the Sabbath. We are not a culture, America is not a culture that keeps the Sabbath in this way. So this is really not for us. We can't keep the Sabbath holy if we don't even keep the Sabbath. So this is for ancient Israel. This is not for us. Fifth commandment, honor your father and mother. That one makes sense. I can do that one. The reason? So that you may live long in the land the Lord your God is giving you, so that you may live long in Canaan. I don't live in Canaan. This isn't talking to me. I don't even own land. I live in an apartment. It doesn't say honor your father and mother so you may live long in your apartment complex. So this one's not talking to me. Next few commandments, you shall not murder, commit adultery, steal, give false testimony. Okay, those are a little more applicable today. Those transfer across cultures a little bit easier than the rest of it. But then look at the last commandment. You shall not covet your neighbor's house. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife or his male or female servant, his ox or donkey, or anything that belongs to your neighbor. Okay, let's look at the things we're not supposed to covet. My neighbor's house. I guess I can do that. That's possible for me to do. If my neighbor next door lives in a house, I am able to covet that. I'm not supposed to covet my neighbor's wife. Well, personally, I can't speak for everyone, but as a gay man, I'm not going to covet anybody's wife. Never lusted after a woman in my life. So that's not a command for me. That doesn't work for me. And besides that, in this culture, in ancient Israel's culture, the husband kind of owns the wife. The husband owns the wife and the male and female servants. I don't really like the idea of owning people. That doesn't sit well with my ethics. So I'm not going to covet a wife or a servant or anything like that, because that's not the way I do things. That's not the way our culture does things. Don't covet his ox or donkey. I don't think those are allowed in my apartment complex. I don't really have a use for an ox or a donkey because I'm not into farming or ranching, so that's not really something that I would do. So this commandment is not really for me. And look at the implied person in the 10th commandment. He's got a house, he's got a wife, he's wealthy enough to have servants, he's a straight male, he is in the agricultural business. And my neighbor doesn't meet all those qualifications. I don't know anybody who meets all those qualifications. This isn't talking to anybody that I know. So this is really foreign to us, and this is really outside of the world that we live in. So why are the Ten Commandments important? What do we do with this if it's not written to us? Well, a lot of people have decided to look at the principles behind the Ten Commandments to see, well, what is the principle behind do not do this instead? And one of the books in our reading list was Joan Chittister's book, The Ten Commandments, Laws of the Heart. And she goes through all the Ten Commandments and picks out principles behind them. So if you're not supposed to murder, what's the principle behind that? It means to value life. So don't murder means to her you have to support health care, housing, food, education, daycare, and just wages. So you have to value life. And we just heard a sermon by my esteemed colleague Andrew, who talked about the principle behind keeping the Sabbath, how you can find rest in God. And that's a good way to look at this. Finding the principles behind the Ten Commandments is a good way to look at this. I like that. I want to take a step even further back, though. Let's not look at the principles. Let's look at what is the Ten Commandments as a whole. The Ten Commandments, the Decalogue, is a piece of literature written to ancient Israel. And it starts, remember the preamble, it starts with God. I am the Lord your God, I'm Yahweh your God, who delivered you from Egyptian slavery. That's what it starts with. It's God stepping down from heaven into human history. It's God stepping into the world of humans to change something, to shape it. It's God interacting with an ancient culture. And we don't always associate, we can't relate to that as well because we don't live in that culture. But what if God steps down today? What if God steps down from heaven and interacts with our history? What if God comes to us today? What would God's message to us be? If God's interacting with our culture, with our society, what would our commandments be? Maybe we would have something like, don't screw up the environment or something. Don't pollute. Maybe you shall not support companies that send labor overseas to child sweatshops. Maybe it's just something as simple as get along with your brothers and sisters in other denominations. Maybe, I don't know what it is. What is God's message to us today? We can relate to some of the commandments, but we can't relate to all of them. So we need to see, what is God telling us today? How is God stepping in to our history? Now, I wasn't going to bring in the New Testament, but I do want to do a quick verse from that. I think the Hebrew Bible can stand perfectly well on its own, but I'm a Christian, got to do some stuff with Jesus, I guess. So I heard this from the Message. 1 minute? Okay. I heard this from the Message. John 1:14. The Word became flesh and blood and moved into the neighborhood. The Word became flesh and blood and moved into the neighborhood. What does God look like when God's in ancient Israel's neighborhood? Well, the Ten Commandments show us that. It shows us how God shapes that neighborhood. And what does God look like when God's in our neighborhood? And are you looking for God? Are you listening? Are you looking for God in our society? Thank you.